All right. Tonight's guest speaker is Rachel Belouin. Rachel received a bachelor's degree in natural resources from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, a master's degree in nonfiction writing from Antioch University, Los Angeles, and a master's in natural resource stewardship with a concentration in grasslands and ecological restoration from Colorado State University. Rachel has experience working and living on a third-generation cattle ranch and enjoys riding her horse, trail running with her son, and a great book. Rachel's day job is with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. She'll tell you more about that. And I'm happy to say that she is also a member of our board of directors. Rachel, we're all looking forward to your presentation. Yeah.
Hi, I'm not used to using a microphone. I was a teacher for 10 years, so I'm gonna get used to this. I like to move, so if I start straying, holler at me, bring me back. It's great to see you and it's great to be here. Thank you, John. Thank you everybody for coming and everybody online. I know it's a rainy night. I'm celebrating the rain. As a rancher, as a person who works with ranchers, as a person who deals a lot with drought and drought management and the stress that comes with drought management. I work with ranchers on that. We'll talk about that a little bit. This rain is just lovely. It's a lot. We'll see how it goes. I was gonna ride my horse this weekend, but it's way too squishy. So I'm bummed about that, but it's good. And thank you, John, for mentioning Swiftfox, because I should have pictures on my presentation of Swiftfox. I love them. And part of my habitat work helps get Swiftfox, and they are just cool. So I don't have any pictures, but I do ask you as we go on. I have a lot of pictures of cows, which is something you might not be used to. I also have pictures of birds. I may have more pictures of cows than birds. I invite anyone to count and let me know how I did. So let's get started. So let's see, this is Grasslands, Birds, and Grazing. And we're going to talk about why I work with all three and what that means in my world. I work with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. I've been with them about a year and a half now. They pulled me out of Wyoming where I was running a cow-calf operation in a ranch, and we'll talk about that. And I'm really excited to be in Fort Collins and to be working for an organization that prioritizes the coming together of education, stewardship, and science. It's just a really fantastic collaboration in-house and with a whole bunch of our partners. We right now work across, in my department, which is stewardship, we work across 6 states. And in a organization as a whole, we collaborate with partners in Canada, in Mexico, and all over the West. So it's just really dynamic. And I'm happy to talk more about Bird Conservancy if there's questions about that as well. So this has been my life for the last while. Hopefully there's going to be cow pictures, but you didn't know they were going to be cute. And they're really cute. So I was running a cow-calf, the calving part for the last 6 years of a third-generation cattle ranch in Wyoming. And I started my career, as John had mentioned, as a park ranger. Then I taught for a number of years at community colleges. And then right before COVID hit, I had been seriously thinking about how can I integrate what I'm doing on the ranch, my conversations about the rangeland, what we're doing with the grass, what we're doing with the forage, what we're doing with the cattle. How can I bring this full circle just for myself and for the ranch? And I ended up going back to school, getting a second master's during COVID and finding Bird Conservancy, which allows me to put it all together. And it's just fantastic. So, yeah, here's a picture. You can see all my pumpkins. These are some pumpkins that I got to work with. And then my perfect day in the office. That was out working with a landowner last fall, and that's what I do. Hop on the horse and we ride out, we work on the range, we talk about their operation, we talk about birds. This particular ranch I was on, they have easements for burrowing owls and prairie dogs, and it's just very dynamic. They also have mountain plovers. So I kind of have a good job. Yeah. So what is this ecosystem that I work on, and why did I choose this, and what's going on with it? And I am originally from New England, and when I moved out here over 20 years ago, as I was driving across the United States, I got to Colorado, and I was so overwhelmed by the vastness of the sky and the openness coming from New England. I was having panic attacks. Like, I'm in my old Honda Civic, I'm driving, I'm panicking, right? I can't believe I've done this. I came out to be a park ranger in Colorado. I already accepted a job, and I'm like, literally having a panic attack. And 20 years later, I can't imagine living anywhere else. I am so in love with the shortgrass prairie. I find it to be one of the most dynamic systems I've ever lived in. And it's one of those hidden gems, right? You know the dynamic nature when you walk into a forest in Colorado, or you go to the Tetons, or you go to my home in New England, and you walk through the hardwood forests, especially in fall, right? You're like, wow, this is obviously amazing. But what I discovered about the shortgrass prairie, which is where we live, here in Fort Collins and the east of us, is that it's equally as amazing and dynamic, but it asks us to just show up and then lean in a little bit differently. And I love that. I love that it asks me to come forward. So the shortgrass historically has been this really dynamic system of literally shortgrass, right? Not those tall, thick grasses that you see in South Dakota, North Dakota, right? Kansas. It was built by herbivores, grazers, the bison and the prairie dogs, two keystone species. And it was built by the combined disturbance of them grazing and fire. And as you can imagine, over the course of the last several centuries, we've managed a lot of that out of it. And we're trying to figure out how to get back to it being that same dynamic, resilient system. It is also a very arid system. All this rain, not normal, right? But it comes in patches, and then we get dry again, right? And then we'll do another rain again. And typically, traditionally, historically, it's dry, and it should be dry. And the grasses are okay with that. Okay. Questions, thoughts, concerns? Feel free to jump in too. I'm looking forward to having a conversation as well, because there's enough, like few of us, we can do it. Yes.
So I've heard that we're a step, but what defines a step?
Can I turn this on? Do I have to leave? Can we talk? Oh, I'm on. Okay. So, is this on? It's on now. Okay. So steppe and prairie are interchangeable. So I call it a shortgrass steppe, but you can also call it the shortgrass prairie, potato.
What does that describe?
It describes just a grassland system. It's an elevated grassland system, so a high elevation grassland. Yes.
Shortgrass steppe kind of resistant to long-term drought situations.
Very, very much so. Absolutely. That's part of what is, I hate using the word normal because I feel like it's a setting on my washing machine and not a setting in nature. But yes, completely adapted to drought. And if we look at historic patterns, it Drought has been a factor of this area for centuries. In addition to that, we can tell by the microbes in the soil and the way that these grasses respond, that they are very drought tolerant. Part of why we know that is they are literally short grasses. They've got short roots, short tillers, small flowers. They are not designed to deal with long-term, long holding of water. They're designed to grab water quick, grow fast, be grazed, move on. So yes, in a typical way, it's more of the humans that are struggling with the drought than the grass, for sure. Good questions, Will. Keep them coming. So bison and prairie dogs, keystone species. And as you know, the bison are really no longer with us, unfortunately, for a whole host of conversations for another time. And the prairie dogs is a very contentious issue as well. And there are definitely a lot of them still out there. But it's a tough balance between what we need to do for grazing, how we're working that now, and keeping these keystone species out there. As you might have guessed, because of this diversity, in terms of the grasses and the ecosystem being dynamic to withstand drought, to withstand grazing, to withstand fire, all of which they co-evolved with, you can imagine that the grassland birds specifically are going to also be very, very diverse. And so this graph here is giving you kind of an idea, for example, of there are plenty of species that would very much like to have bare ground. They love that visibility. They want to see that swift fox coming. And then there are other species that want to be in dense, tufted vegetation, right, and hide in that. And then there's everybody in between. So on the bare ground spectrum, and these are some eggs from mountain plovers that I saw actually on that horseback ride. They want bare ground, so they will actually nest on prairie dog colonies. That's their preferred spot. And of these birds, and you can imagine how this might work, but of these birds who are very specialized, who want these different niches, they are suffering the most in terms of decline. Okay. So some of this diversity, 2 species that are in decline. John went looking for a long spur, couldn't find one. Disappointed. They're shortgrass specialists. They prefer heavy grazing and very, very loamy soils, whereas the grasshopper sparrow, also in decline, would rather have some structure with some height, some midgrass height. They would like light grazing to keep that height structure taller, and they prefer sandy soils. And one of the difficulties with grassland birds, but also one of the amazing things, is they're not going to just adapt overnight to say, okay, you don't have this system anymore, I can do something different. Because they co-evolved in this system, right? Going back to the grazers, going back to the droughts, the grazing, the fire, they are very, very niche specific. So one of the questions I get all the time is, we shouldn't be grazing. Grazing is awful, right? It looks awful, it's not good. Oh my gosh, they're eating all the vegetation, and then the birds have nothing. Oh, this is bad. But what we know on the short grass is that grazing is a compatible use and everything is co-evolved with it. So it is completely natural, right? The bison did it, the prairie dogs did it and do it. And right now, our best solution for this is to try and mimic the grazing that the bison and the prairie dogs do with cattle. Yeah. Sorry, but
It seems like the microphone is distorting your voice really loud.
Hold it down.
I
I'm
don't
so,
know what it is, but
I'm
I
sorry.
hear every single thing you say and I can't.
I'm sorry.
So, anybody else feel it's distorting a little bit? I think a lot of people feel that.
Hear you just fine.
I so never use these. I'm sorry. I'll hold it down a little bit and I'll talk a little bit louder. Is that better? Absolutely. Okay, so grazing, natural, right? The bison did it, prairie dogs. And so how do we bring that back and how do we keep that going on the grasslands? And how do we manage well so that we can manage for all of those species that need all of those different niches is what we're trying to accomplish. Grazing, it removes dead biomass, it rejuvenates the soil, it helps control invasive species, and it provides this gradient of habitat structure that is critical to the spectrum of birds. Because we need some tall structure, I mean, not this tall, but tall, right? And we need some bare ground if we're gonna have all of these species. So my work is literally working with partners, with landowners, with scientists to figure out how do we manage grazing to the best of our ability for bird species on the grassland. At the same time, keeping ranches viable so that they're on the land to do this grazing. What we're also finding is that, and we know, and I know from my experience, and you might have heard too, it's very hard to make a living as a rancher, right? So how do we put that all together? That's my work. I don't have an immediate answer, by the way. What we're trying to work with right now, and historically, for a long time, the management practices have said, okay, we're just going to manage for the middle and hope for the best. So we call it the middle conundrum, where we are just emphasizing optimal stocking rates. We just work on having mid-range habitat structure or high structure. And it's very, it's non-risky, right? And everyone can kind of manage to the middle and let's just do this and it's a little bit safe. And as you can see from this graph, it's not going to work out for everybody, right? We're hitting some habitat needs, but we're missing so many others. And we might also not be doing the best we can do for vegetation productivity and the quality of that forage as well. And so part of what we want to make sure that we're doing is that because we need these grazers, we need them to be foraging. We want them to be eating quality forage so that they are keeping these ranches in production. So we've got a lot of habitat still underrepresented because of that managed to the middle paradigm. We're not getting the really good bare patches, and we're not getting we're getting too much of the dense stuff on some ends, and we're also very fragmented, right? So we might have a piece here that works for some, but not a piece here, and so on and so forth. And so one of the things we're also working on is trying to build better connectivity. This is, we have a couple of slides that are kind of sad and depressing, but this is the truth. We are losing 4 million acres of grassland every year. And as you can see, short grass prairie is leading the way. This picture taken from an airplane is just really consistent with the Great Plains. What have we always historically thought of the Great Plains as being perfect for? Farming, right? So we have completely fragmented it with farming. We've put in pivots and irrigation. We've turned the grassland into crop fields. We've also built on it, right? It's flat. It's easy to build. It's not the mountains. And so development, crop production, it's taking the grasslands, and we are consistently losing 4 million acres a year. In conjunction with that, we are losing grassland birds at an exponential rate greater than any other bird species in America. Overall, we've lost 2.9 billion birds since 1970 overall, with grassland birds being at the steepest decline. Are you ready for some better news?
Yes.
Should we move on? Oh my God. I know, I don't like those statistics. And like, I'll be honest, it's overwhelming, right? Like, I'm a rangeland specialist and my job is grasslands. And then I think about 4 million acres a year. I can't protect 4 million acres a year. I can't do it. Right? And so I look at that and I freak out. Those two stories. Or I wake up at 2:30 in the morning freaking out. And then I go back to work and I realize it's one landowner at a time. It's one ranch at a time. And I'm better, right? I get on the horse, I ride out, we have conversations. We can do this one ranch at a time. We can do this one community at a time. We don't have to try and do 4 million acres tomorrow, and I don't have to do it by myself because I've got all these ranchers who are actually really interested in how do we do this better, because they want that quality forage, right? They want those birds to show up because it means they're doing something right, doing something well. So our stewardship team is working with partners to change this story. This map shows you, I have 15 private lands wildlife biologists on our team. They are across 6 states of the Great Plains. There's a whole bunch of them here in Colorado. And they work with private landowners to implement change and offer technical advice and also connect them to financial resources to help change this story. And these two pictures, the top picture is with a producer I work with out here in Weld County, Swiftfox, seen him on his place. I'm gonna see him tomorrow, actually. He just finished calving. And then the picture right below that is my counterpart, Angela, and her daughter. And we were out visiting another producer who's also in Weld County during his calving season back in March. So these are two producers that we work with regularly who are completely invested in changing this story.
Wait, what's the light blue?
Oh, so the light blue, we have some biologists who specialize in wetland work as well. So the light blue is where we've got biologists working on wetlands and riparian areas. Why do we work with private landowners? Part of it is because we kind of have to, right? If 85% of the eastern portion of Colorado, all that shortgrass prairie is privately owned, we need to, we have to, right? And that hasn't been prioritized for a long time, but we are also trying to change that. So here is a map of the Western United States, and you can see Colorado there. If you look at us, that whole white side, the whole eastern side is all private, right? We are also partnered with the Grassland Roadmap Initiative, which is a 3-country, multi-nation, and multi-state proactive action to prioritize grasslands as a habitat at risk and to prioritize funding, and also to help us prioritize where we're working on the landscape. Traditionally, historically, forests have been highly prioritized because of course they have, right? They're fuzzy, they're big, they're beautiful, they're amazing, right? They're the mountains. And we're trying to get grasslands to become equally as important as forests have been. This is one of my biologists. This is Katie Merriweather, picture of her. Our private lands wildlife biologists, they are the boots on the ground. They are embedded in NRCS offices across those 6 states. And what that means is they have a whole lot of contact with private landowners. It also means they have access and ability to connect private landowners to USDA funding through NRCS and FSA, which then allows for producers to put in improvements on their land to then work with managed grazing practices. For example, you might have a producer who really wants to change up their grazing system. They want to use this pasture differently than they ever have. They want to move between different areas, but they don't have water in some of these pastures. And so we can help connect them to these resources with USDA that pays for piping and wells. Then they can all start moving those pastures, doing a different kind of grazing to then create that different structure and different habitat. We also do a lot of drought management counseling and drought management work, because this is the tough stuff, right? How do you make it through a drought? How do you keep going financially, economically for ranchers through that hard time? It's definitely a component we work on. We are prioritizing compatible land use practices and collaboration. Relationships are the foundation of everything we do, and it absolutely moves at the speed of trust. And so a lot of what we do is meeting with landowners and talking about their worries, talking about their needs, talking about their land, spending time out on the range, getting health assessments of rangeland, doing bird surveys, and having these comprehensive conversations with them. What do they need? What do we see as possible on the land? What do they see? How can we bring wildlife into the conversation? And how can we put all this together? We talk economics, we talk family issues, we talk vegetation, we talk cattle health. It's a very dynamic conversation for our biologists. We talk wildlife, you name it, it's on the table. And so this is our goal overall, is to manage both the vegetation, right, to create profitable ranching, to bring in that wildlife component, and all the while we are doing collaborative learning with each other. I learn as much from these producers and landowners as they learn from me, right? It's a complete exchange, and sometimes we're learning new things together, which is absolutely phenomenal. This picture, we brought out Dallas Mount. He runs a ranching for profit workshops all over the country, and we brought him out last summer. We're bringing him out again. He works hand in hand with producers to figure out exactly how to do this. They look at the soil, they look at the vegetation, they talk about economics, right? They talk about how to be resilient both with the land and with the bank so that they can keep going. Because the greatest threat at this point is if private landowners sell out to either the farming component or to development. And then that grassland is really gone, right? We don't have a chance to work on steps to make it viable and sustainable. That make sense? Questions, thoughts? Yes, sir.
Do you set specific goals for each landowner, or you jointly come together on that, and then you actually measure whether you achieve those goals at some time in the future?
That's a great question. We do it collaboratively, right? They have goals and needs, priorities, and then we collaborate together to see how can we make that happen. And in conjunction with their goals, how can we bring in that wildlife component? And sometimes, I'll be honest, that wildlife component is definitely not at the top of the list. But what we know is if they're doing fantastic job grazing, if they've got a healthy rangeland, if they are successfully managing for drought and they are economically viable, guess what's going to happen? Birds are going to use that habitat because they're creating that habitat. So we sometimes put our wildlife desires, we don't talk about them directly because we're working on those other pieces, and then we bring it in further. But we absolutely do it collaboratively, 100%. And then we do go back, we measure the success, and part of that is a goal to have very adaptive management, right? Nothing is static. So we're gonna make the best decisions in the moment that we can do. We're gonna set the best goals with them and then the best strategies for those goals. And then it's gonna rain like this. And we're gonna go, okay, new plan, right? And sometimes that new plan is in the minute, and sometimes we can be a little bit proactive. And we're gonna see some cool season grasses, you guys pop on this prairie. Woo! Oh my gosh, this is gonna be amazing. We don't get a lot of cool seasons because it doesn't usually do that. It's gonna be phenomenal. And so I have no doubt that when I meet with this rancher tomorrow, we're gonna talk cool season grasses. He's gonna be bouncing like a little kid. Because here they come, and he's going to be thinking in his mind when this rain stops and those cool seasons pop, okay, which pasture should I go to capitalize on that phenomenal early growth? We weren't planning to talk about that. We didn't think this was going to happen, right? So we're gonna literally adjust in the moment. Absolutely. It's been a learning process and it's hard, right? Nobody wants to be told, do this on your land. Nobody wants to be told you're doing something wrong, right? And it would be phenomenal if I could come in with a silver bullet. This is a quote from a stakeholder that's working on a collaborative project in Weld County in conjunction with researchers from USDA. And it's been, sometimes the conversations are super heated. I've worked with a town on the eastern plains of Colorado. It's called Carville. Very, very small town, probably about 30 residents right in the center of the town. And then if you expand outside of the town, you might get to 100 people, right? And some researchers showed up and said, hey, we're here to research, mountain plovers. Who's gonna, we just want to come on your property and start researching. And the town said, oh, I don't think so. I beg your pardon, right? We have questions, back it up, right? It moves at the speed of trust. Relationships are everything. And it does take some time. But then suddenly I've got producers texting me, oh my gosh, I just saw this bird. I don't know what it is, but I'm really excited about it. Right? Look at the bird. To be like, yeah, it's a Western meadowlark, but that's good. But they send me bird pictures all the time and I want them, right? I don't care if it's a Western meadowlark, right? It's fantastic. And they're looking and they're monitoring and they're using that as information. I think he's like, I think I'm doing something right. This bird just showed up. And I'm like, you are totally getting this right, right? It's just fantastic. I love that part. So here's a little video because what we haven't talked about, which you're not asking, and I feel like might be some elephant in the room. So let's put it on the table is, wait a minute, you're almost supposed to say, Rachel, cows are bad for the environment. Someone is thinking this. Methane, meat. Isn't someone thinking? Is there no one thinking? Check online. I always get this question, so I'm gonna freak out. I don't get it.
Someone's thinking.
Someone's thinking. You don't have to out yourself. We should talk about it, right? Because you hear it's very common that when we talk about environmental concerns, we talk about conservation, we talk about doing good things for the environment. Cows are not at the top of the list of a good choice, right? So why am I championing cows? We don't have any bison. It literally is our next best option, right? Cows graze very different than bison. It is true. They choose different things. They bite off and move the grasses differently. They also move differently across the landscape. They utilize water differently. But they're the closest thing we have. And with good grazing management, we can help them do what they may not naturally choose to do, but that what would be very helpful, right? Bison will travel. Oh my gosh, they want to go. I was talking to a fellow who worked with Ted Turner Ranches, and he's got something in Montana, like 400,000 acres. I don't know, a number that like blows my mind. And the bison, they were still like, not enough, right? Which is so fantastic. But cows would be like 400,000 acres. I'm terrified, right? I just, a mile from water to food. I feel good, right? But as you can imagine, then they would just graze like a square mile. So good managed grazing works to move them using resources to put in other water, right? Helps make that difference. So cows, yes. Do they make methane? Yes. It comes out in their burps. Comes out in the back end too, but more so in the front end. But what happens if we don't have them? What if we get rid of the cows? Then what? What's that?
No meat.
No meat. Then we've got no ranches, which means we've got no grazing, right? If we don't have any grazing, what happens? You get a forest. Correct. Because we're not burning, right? We're not going to burn. Can we agree? Like that's not happening. Like there's occasionally prescribed burns, but we're not going to just burn, right? So what happens if we get a forest? Right? All of these bird species from like here over have zero habitat. Gone. This is why I'm a cow fan. Right? Their burps smell. This is horrible. Right? I've been burped on. I've had to, you do a lot of veterinary work as a rancher, right? And so I've tubed cows too to release gas and bloating when they've been sick. Like methane is not pretty, right? It's awful. Ooh, oh my gosh, right? But they're fantastic. They're providing us this amazing service because we could easily turn into a forest. They're having this serious problem with this in Nebraska right now, with woody encroachment, with the red cedar, which is native to Nebraska, true, but it is taking over the grasslands exponentially because of the lack of grazers and fire. And it's turning Nebraska, the eastern side of Nebraska, into a forest. Yeah.
So also maybe, repeat the question, so
Oh,
people can hear online.
sorry.
But it's okay, but I have so many questions. One thing, you said they aren't using fire, but what about fire for controlling this, the tree encroachment?
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to. The use of fire, all of this co-evolved with fire, 100%. Grazing and fire. The fire return interval for the shortgrass prairie is about 15 to 20 years. So it should burn every 15 to 20 years. And fire brings nutrients back into the soil in a different way. It facilitates with water infiltration. It takes up that dead biomass that no grazer wants to eat because there's no quality, there's no nutrition left in it, right? It's like a rice cake. Right, I mean, so and fire, think of, okay, so this is how I explain the importance of fire. Carrots. How many of you like carrots? I mean, just in general, I like a carrot. Okay, did you know that it's better to eat cooked carrots than raw carrots? That your body can actually ingest the very important nutrients, vitamin K, in carrots better if they're cooked first, right? Fire is the same way. It's releasing things and moving things through a system that just consumption doesn't do, right? But then we run into some really toughy things. It's not wildly loved. Not loved. Fire's scary. And we also have 85% of eastern Colorado is privately owned. How do we do a burn? We have some areas where some of our partners do controlled patch burning. They'll burn like 40 acres and so on and so forth. But fire is a hard sell for sure. It would make a huge difference, no doubt, but it's a hard sell, right? I can't sell the Brooklyn Bridge to New Yorkers. I can't sell fire to Coloradoans. Tough one. You all gonna eat meat now? Anyone want a burger? A grass-fed burger, right? Don't buy the corn-fed, buy the grass-fed. Yeah,
Sorry, that was my next question about grass-fed beef. How many ranches, because there's a premium for that, right? And yeah, it goes along with all the things you're talking about, the rotational grazing and moving the cattle and keeping the grasslands healthy and.
so here's another one of those sticky wickets with the economics, right? Grass-fed beef, it's more expensive than your regular corn-fed from the feedlot beef. Is it not, right? 100%. That's because corn is readily available. It goes to the feedlot. It fattens those cattle up really quick. Those cattle have that beautiful marbling, right? And there you go. It's much harder to break into that market of grass-fed beef for all of those other reasons, right? Can you imagine if I came to your cereal aisle with a whole new cereal type thing? And then there's the economics components that are big in terms of the packers, the processors, the marketers, how it gets to you at the supermarket, that sort of thing. But if you can contract with a local rancher to buy grass-fed beef, that's fantastic, right? But it's a harder hit to your wallet as well. Absolutely. This is why it's a complex problem, because that economics piece, right, which is so big, we can't touch the cattle market. Right? I can't touch all of that process. So what can we do? No. This, I went back to this slide because you had the question about the woody encroachment. So the purple, can you see the purple? The purple there is woody and shrub encroachment and cropland. The yellow is where the grasslands are super vulnerable because they border where that is already occurring. And then the green is where we currently have remaining intact grasslands. And this is, of course, the entire Great Plains. So what we do with this information, with these maps, is this helps us when we break it down by state. It helps us prioritize specific areas and where we're also going to place specific financial resources. It's much harder to take back from woody encroachment than it is to defend where we already have grasslands and then just keep moving from there. If that makes sense too. What else you got? Very quiet. This is my buddy. Have baby cow experience. Everyone should have one. Look at him. Does it get cuter than this? And if you say puppies, I'll agree with you, but this is pretty cute. Right? So I just wanted to give you some cow experience. They're not just burping. Yes.
So I have an impression that the percentage of the population eating beef has been going down. Is that reflected in the overall, how much is produced? And so the long-term question is, what happens if that continues? We bring back a bison? I'm a fan of bison.
Oh, I'm a huge fan, 100%. Oh my gosh, they're incredible. Like ecologically speaking, biologically speaking, they're unbelievable. But back to your question, it's a tough conversation because if we think about the role of beef in a global sense, right? The destruction of the Amazon, for example, that's a very, very different conversation than the Eastern Plains of Colorado. That is not the same, right? And so when I talk about supporting the cattle and the beef and the ranchers, I'm talking about the Great Plains. Because when we talk about globally, we really do have a big crisis in terms of creating more pasture land to drive that business. And that's out of my wheelhouse, right? Happy to chat about that after, right? But when we're talking, so what's difficult for the ranchers, and we'll talk, you know, here in Eastern Colorado, for example, is that market prices, supplemental hay prices, supplemental feed prices, then the prices that are happening in the markets as well, and how they're able to, what market can they get their beef to? And then the competition within that from beef coming in from foreign countries. So it's a dynamic, difficult conversation. My best, like what I think about is I want to keep those ranchers ranching. I want to keep that grass intact. I want to see fantastic management to create habitat for all of these species. And so what can I do to help facilitate that here in Colorado? Right? Here on the Front Range. But I can't touch the Amazon. You know. But I can make a difference for the mountain plovers and for the long spurs here. That's how I think about it.
Yeah,
Oh,
so Rachel, is that the end of your
It is,
prepared
sorry, yeah,
remarks?
prepared remarks.
So now we can just invite people online, if they have questions, to type them in the chat window. The rest of you in the audience here, you can raise your hand and ask Rachel questions. Just every now and then look over to Andrew to see if he has questions, and he does have one for you, right?
Yeah, you were anticipating questions about cows and beef, but I was waiting for the burrowing owl. And we did get one. So the question online is, how do you convince a rancher that burrowing owls are important? Because that means that prairie dogs are going to have their towns. I would imagine that ranchers do not like prairie dogs.
That is correct. By and large, prairie dogs are seen as a competition because they graze. What do? They chop it all down. They're phenomenal, right? And so by and large, and historically, they've been viewed as a competitor to cow. And if we were talking about bison and we're talking about historically, how did those two keystone species work together? The prairie dogs would graze it. And then what would happen is brand new tillers would come up, and those would be the juicy ice cream. And so the bison would right in, right? They loved that. And so they would move across the landscape going out, right? Moving with that. We're not doing that. And they can absolutely be competitive, especially in a drought, right? Where all the vegetation is at a premium. I don't try to convince anybody of anything. I listen to what it is that they need, who they are, what they're doing on the landscape. And we talk. And we talk about what they see, and we talk about what I see. And then we talk some more. And we try to figure out how to build it together. I work with some producers who have prairie dogs, who have burrowing owls, who have set aside portions of their ranch in protected easements for this wildlife because they support that ecological value. So receiving that financial assistance with easements is really helpful. But also having enough acreage that is also a possibility and it doesn't feel like a competition is also important. Yeah. That answer their question?
I would imagine.
Okay. Well, they can holler back at me if it doesn't. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
And what we've done by chopping up the land by bisecting it too is, I think a lot of people don't realize that the prairie dogs used to move across the landscape. They didn't stay in a little box, and so that probably changes their what they're doing ecologically a little bit too. So they're one of my favorites because people don't realize too that they're so intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just destructive little rodents. They're intelligent, amazing beings. So
Yeah.
I just love to tell people they move. They're supposed to move.
And so the question is about prairie, or it's not really a question, it's a statement about prairie dogs, and that if they had they wouldn't stay just in a colony and not spread out and then move to another habitat. They would absolutely move and go forth and then the grass growth would follow that. But due to fragmentation, right? And fencing and in our different land uses, we've also boxed them into certain places too. And so we have to continue to figure out how do we manage with what we have now, right? And how we have put this together. We have a landowner that we work with down in the Lamar area. They have prairie dogs. And last fall, CPW, who's one of our big partners, they did a black-footed ferret release on this person's property. They have enough acreage with the prairie dogs to bring in this natural predator. We released the ferret with them and fingers crossed, right? We're returning some of those natural systems because the other component is by wiping out the ferret, we've also helped the prairie dog population just, right, explode. And so that's not good ecologically either. Yeah. John.
Rachel, could you tell us where pronghorn fit into the picture, like, pre-settlement and today?
Yeah. I'm actually a huge fan of pronghorn. Do I say that about every species?
So far.
Like I realize that. Okay, for the record, I hate snakes. Hate them. I'm fine with spiders. I don't particularly appreciate like the wolf spiders like jumping like on me, but snakes, hate them. Don't appreciate them. So we get that off the table. Pronghorn are so cool. They're one of the most adaptable wildlife species that I can think of off the top of my head. They have adapted to colonization and settlement, by relocating themselves into areas. They have adapted to our farming and our fragmentation and our loss of grasslands by adapting to eat shrubs. They've adapted their how many young they give birth to. They are very dynamic. They would eat forbs if they could. So if you see pronghorn, something wonderful is happening, right? It means you're getting some forbs, which is indicative of very healthy rangelands. They are also a grazer, but they're not in any way, shape, or form competitive with cows. They're going to eat different things. So, right, ranchers, if they see pronghorn, it just means healthy things are happening. They're not eating the same things. Have at it. And pronghorn are going to move so much across such distances. You know, they're not going to stay. One of the things we do talk a lot about with pronghorn is they are under fence goers. They're not jumpers. So having wildlife friendly fencing is really important so that they can move across all that fragmentation and all that fencing well, easily without getting hung up. So we work with producers a lot to implement wildlife friendly fencing, specifically for pronghorn in particular. Because mule deer will jump and they've got this, but pronghorn, they want to go under, and fences are also not super visible, right? Like I've literally seen pronghorn going, they're the fastest land animal that we have out here. You can't see a fence, right? So creating visibility for them and for birds is important. Yeah, they're so cool. And get a picture of a pronghorn. They're smiling. Like you just, right? Have you looked at their little faces? It's just like, that's so sweet. Yeah.
Is there a separate difference between problems with birds on the shortgrass prairie and the tallgrass prairie?
So to be completely honest, I'm such a shortgrass specialist. I can't really speak to the issues in the tallgrass. What I can speak to with regards to that is across the Great Plains, tallgrass, northern mixed grass, shortgrass, we're all having the same problems of encroachment, loss of grazing and fire, and development. So yes, 100%. I can't speak to which species in particular, but yes. Yeah.
On terms of the problems of the ranchers,
Yeah.
is this true that foreign beef can come in here and if it's processed like a carcass or even live on the hoof, if it's processed in the United States, they can call it American beef?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Well, I've heard that's true, and a group of ranchers in the West have formed a coalition to ask people to buy directly from them,
Yeah.
rather than go to the grocery stores, and that can help them survive.
And that part is absolutely true. And I know about that part. I would love to look into the other part, and I will, because that's really interesting to me.
It's been advertised on the radio.
Okay. Yeah, no, I would love to look into that. But if you can buy directly from a rancher, then you are completely directly supporting all of these processes. Absolutely.
And then my other question is, what about all that federal land that I mean, the government owns tons of land.
They do.
Well, are they getting managed?
So we have a lot of federal partners as well, BLM, National Forest Service. They are absolutely working on managing their land as well. We partner with Pawnee National Grasslands and Comanche National Grasslands. They do management practices for both of those areas as well. And they have grazing leases with ranchers to do grazing there. I am not part of their decision on their grazing management. That's a federal decision. But they all do some form of management. Arsenal, Rocky Mountain Arsenal down in Denver, does grassland management. They actually burn very frequently to support certain species such as mountain plover. So they're actively trying to increase habitat area to encourage them to come and nest. So yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I just don't have good, not a fed.
Rachel, we have time for one more
Okay.
or two quick ones, depending on how long the first question might take.
Sorry, I could talk about this all day.
That's great. We love your enthusiasm.
I
Any
don't
other
like it.
questions?
Andrew, you have anything?
I'll ask one of the ones, yeah, we got a couple that came in here. so
Okay, and I'm happy to stay for a minute, answer online questions too.
I encourage to email some of them.
Oh,
A
perfect,
little bit longer form.
perfect, yeah.
It was a follow-up though on the prairie dog
Yeah.
and burrowing owl question. Just saying it seems that, as if you said that the rancher has to be convinced to create an easement for prairie dogs. I'm worried about not enough land being available for owls.
So
What did he say?
so he's concerned because prairie dogs are a tough conversation, right? There's a lot of political components too, and tough, right? They're not seen as the compatible component, and I'll be honest, in drought, it's really, really tough. So if that's the story and ranchers need some sort of incentive to be able to create that habitat, then what about burrowing owls? So burrowing owls are definitely one of our species that we think about. We know that we want to increase habitat for them as well. One of the cool things about burrowing owls is that they will return to the same place that they've nested before. So they don't always have to have a new spot. And that's really exciting because if we can we do have places where there are prairie dog colonies and holes and opportunities for burrowing owls, and they will come back there and keep returning to that same spot. That's really, really positive for them. And burrowing owls continue to be a conversation for us. But we walk through some of those parts very gently, right? Absolutely. Not my land. I'm there to help. How can I help? Right? Yeah. One more?
Yeah, one more. Anyone?
I just saw a burrowing owl pair down in Carville, like just 2 weekends ago. And they were mating, and he was flying around and being all zoomy. And she was like, "Oh, for God's sake, just park yourself, just park it." Right. And it was great. And then the prairie dogs were like, "Oh, I gotta go." And then the plovers were like, "I can't do that." And it was fantastic. I loved it. Right. And then there was this moment when the female and the male stopped, and everyone was like, we're standing together. We're all like taking pictures, and then they were like, "Okay, we're done." That's all I get. We're done.
Rachel, thank you so much. That was wonderful.